Chapter 361 Final Push. 4. Outside of Inferno headquarters. As powerful blasts shook the air, spreading a powerful gust of wind throughout the expansive battle. Thick residuals threads of mana lingered in the air, carrying themselves in the form of color smoke. Suddenly, a subtle chime rang amidst the fierce battlefield. Ding! We've got a message. Bang! Raising his hand and pointing his gun towards one of the Durgars in the distance, Leopold pulled the trigger and a powerful energy blast shot towards the Durgar, killing it instantly. Without paying much mind to it, turning his head and looking towards the others, Leopold flashed his communication device. It's time to get a move on. Looks like it's finally our turn. Clay. Jeet got it. Blocking an incoming energy blast, Hein replied with a low grunt. Taking a step back, he looked towards Ava, who calmly dealt with the Durgars with her pets. But there was a big difference to how she fought compared to her previous fights up above. During the demon waves. Toodle-too. Kier. 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 The movements of her pets were a lot more fluent, and Ava was able to keep blowing onto the flute for a lot longer than before. Looks like Malval has done a good job at fixing the flute, Hein thought to himself as he stared at Ava. Had it not been for Malval, who had repaired a small part of the flute, Ava would have had a lot more trouble fighting against the Durgars at the moment. With her now utilizing less mana with each use of the flute, she could now fight for a prolonged period of time. I'm done setting up the portal. A voice suddenly sounded in Hein's ear. The moment the voice reached his ears, Hein's eyes instantly became sharp as he looked at Leopold and Ava, who also looked back at him. Let's go. Without wasting a single second, he twisted the heel of his foot and smashed his shield against one of the Durgars behind him, opening up a path for him and the others to go through. Slowly exiting the portals, Douglas alongside a few other members carefully scanned their surroundings. The walls of the room they were teleported in were coated by a tough metallic alloy. Plastered by the sides of the walls were all sorts of different holographic devices displaying all sorts of geometric shapes and patterns that morphed continuously. They were a total of 7 members present at the moment. For obvious reasons, they couldn't bring all the members in. If they did, not only would the elders upstairs realize they were in, but the situation outside would crumble within a short second. In fact, their very presence at the moment was a risk in itself. The last one to step out of the portal was Alga, who curiously looked around. Where exactly are we? She asked, joining up with the group. Inside of Inferno. Douglas replied with a calm, rippleless tone. To the other present, his voice was nothing but calm as it powerfully rang inside of their minds. What did you just say? Did you just say that we're inside of Inferno? Are you playing a joke, human? Voices filled with disbelief and shock echoed throughout the room as everyone had a hard time understanding just what was going on. Raising his hand to calm the people down, Douglas patiently said, "We don't have time to waste discussing whether I'm lying or not." Lowering his head and staring at the communication device in his hands, Douglas once again opened his mouth to speak. "I've already gotten the coordinates of where we need to go. Follow me and I'll prove to you that we're inside of Inferno." Gently pressing his foot onto the ground, he walked towards the door of the room and calmly exited the room. In his hands, the communication device where the location of the Durgan Elder Council was located. Gazing at Douglas's back from behind, the others looked at each other before deciding to follow him. Although they were initially in shock, they weren't elites for nothing. In matters of seconds, they were back to their usual selves. Wait here. Gazing at a familiar door in the distance, I extended my hand and stopped Waylon from taking a step further. Coming to a halt, Waylon's brows tightly knit as he looked at the door at the end of the long corridor. We were still quite far, about a couple of 100 meters away, but with our vision, we could clearly see that the door was now half opened. The reason why I decided to stop right here was because I didn't want to run the risk of getting exposed just yet. The others must have already gone in, I muttered, staring at Waylon, who was gazing at the door with his eyes squinted. Although there were no energy fluctuating coming out from the room in the distance that indicated that a fight was going on, judging from how the door was half opened, I could tell that Jever and the others had already entered the Elder Hall. "Are you planning on waiting for the others?" Waylon asked from the side. Lowering my head and starting at the communication device in my hands, I nodded slightly. "Yeah. Realistically speaking, if we go in now, we'll be nothing but a burden." "You're right," Waylon replied with a bitter smile on his face, signifying that he too agreed with my words. Quickly chugging a mana recovery potion, I added. Not only that, but we also have to give them time to sort everything out. Which side? Both. I mysteriously said as I glanced towards his left. A smile soon crept up on my face. Looks like they're already here. Right as my words started to fade, coming from the other side of the hall were the figures of multiple people headed our way. At their lead was Douglas, who calmly led them through the dark corridors of Inferno. Did you guys encounter any trouble on your way? Waylon asked, walking up to Douglas. Briefly nodding in Waylon's direction, Douglas's steps came to a halt as he calmly said. We met quite a few Durgars on our way here, but we cleanly wiped them out. With the communications and surveillance system down, the elders are probably unaware that we're here. Pausing, Douglas's brows knit for a brief second as he scrutinized Waylon from top to bottom. What happened to you? You're injured? No, my mana is severely depleted at the moment. Okay. Turning his head, Douglas looked at the others behind him. I guess only the elders and I can put up a fight against us at this point. Right? Waylon nodded his head in agreement as he stared at the group behind Douglas. Even though they were all currently suppressing their auras in order to not attract the attention of the elders in the distance, the pressure they give out was no joke. Catching a glimpse of the door in the distance, Douglas raised his hand and pointed at it. I presume that's the place we need to go, right? Should we get going? The more time we waste here, the more people die outside. Since they had taken a large chunk of the elite from the battle outside, every second they wasted here would worsen the situation outside. Facing the door in the distance with unprecedented solemnness, Douglas along with the others quietly headed for it. All right, let's go. Waylon nodded his head in agreement. Then turning his head to face me, he whispered. Let's go. Yeah, give me a second. Sending a quick message through my communication device, I took a deep breath before following Waylon and the others into the room. If everything goes according to the plan, everything should end in the next hour. But, with a dagger stabbed deeply into his back, Gervis fell onto the cold hard floor with a small thud. With his eyes open wide, Gervis gazed at Rander, who was standing on top of his body with a cold look on his face. You should have thought better about your previous decisions. This is on you, Rander uttered with a look filled with malice. Bending down and retrieving the dagger that was stabbed Gervis's back, Rander stared at the blood that dripped from the sharp body of the dagger. Taking his eyes away from the dagger, he glared at Gervis. I can't forgive you for leaving Jomnuk behind and not punishing the ones responsible for his kidnapping. Raising his foot, Rander kicked Gervis's body with his foot. Thump. Why did you leave him at the hands of those idiots? Thump. Thump. Rander relentlessly continued to kick Gervis's body. The sound of his foot smashing against his body repeatedly sounded throughout the hall as Orion stared at the scene with amusement. Glancing behind him, where a Durgan elder was busy setting up a portal, he thought back at his previous encounter with Rander. Many did not know this, but he was in fact very close friends with Jomnuk, the dwarven engineer they kidnapped in order to gain access to the beacons. It was thanks to his kidnapping that they were even able to shut down 2 beacons. It was at that moment that they thought that they were going to win the war, but unfortunately things didn't end up that way. Before they knew it, their headquarters had been infiltrated and a massive army suddenly showed up out of nowhere. Fortunately, they were aware that the dwarves were planning something, as Rander has been in constant contact with them. He originally wasn't on their side, but in a desperate bid to save his friend Jomnuk, he decided to betray the dwarves and backstab Jever at the very last moment. Like we agreed. I've gotten rid of him. Now tell me where Jomnuk is. Rander's voice reverberated throughout the hall, snapping Orion out of his thoughts. With his eyes locked onto him, Rander continued to speak. We've signed a mana contract. As long as I betray the dwarves and kill Gervis, you will give Jomnuk to me. He then pointed at Gervis, who was lying down on the ground, dead. I've held up my end of the deal, it's your turn. Wordlessly staring at Rander from his seat, Orion propped his elbows on the table. Interlocking his fingers and resting his chin on it, his eyes paused on Gervis's lifeless body. Channeling his mana towards his eyes, he made sure to check if Gervis was truly dead. His heart has stopped beating. Only upon confirming that he was truly dead that he finally relaxed. Although he had already signed a mana contract with Jomnuk, it was only after the deed was done that Orion knew that Rander was on their side. At least for now. A huge sense of relief washed over his body as he thought back at the long agonizing years he had suffered due to Gervis. Even though he had not been the one who had killed him, the fact that Gervis had died knowing that one of his closest aides was the one responsible for his death pleased him just as much. Just recalling his face before death pleased Orion to no end. So, did you not hear what I said? Where is Jomnuk? Once again disrupting Orion out of his thoughts was Jomnuk's powerful voice. Where is he? Calm down, Orion lightly said as he raised his hands, trying to calm the anger-stricken Rander. We'll let you meet soon enough. You know we signed a mana contract. Since you've held your end of the deal, so will I. Suddenly his brow raised. Lowering his head and staring at the small panel attached to his desk, his brows furrowed slightly. It looks like we have guests coming. Bang. As soon as his words faded, the door of the room burst open and multiple figures slowly walked in. But the moment they all entered, they all froze in shock at the sight that was presented before them. Chapter 362. Everything coming together. 1. Gervis. Staring at Gervis's lifeless corpse, Douglas shuddered slightly, his voice strained. What followed his words was an intense chill that shrouded the entire hall. It didn't take a genius to understand what had happened, especially with Rander standing not so far from Gervis with a dagger in his hands, dripping with blood. Lifting his head, Douglas's eyes paused on Rander. Why have you decided to betray us? Douglas asked in a tone bereft of emotion. His voice was calm and composed, but everyone in the room could feel the anger hidden within. The air around him trembled. Why did you do that, Rander? Silence. Douglas was only met with silence. Rander just kept staring at him in the eyes. After a while, raising his small, bulky hand, Rander pointed it at Waylon, who was standing next to Ren. This is all your fault, human. If not for you, I would have never been forced into such a situation. Rander mouthed as he turned his head to face Douglas. If not for your companion's negligence, Jomnuk would have never have found himself in such a situation. His voice thunderously rang throughout the whole hall. It contained all sorts of different emotions, with pain and agony being the primary ones as Rander mourned for the kidnapping of his friend. Lowering his head and staring at Gervis's dead body, Rander's expression turned to that of disgust. And him. Despite the fact that Jomnuk had been kidnapped, one of the most important members of the city, he failed to punish the human responsible for the blunder and instead give him the power to take control of the operation because of some flowery words he spoke through the use of a mana contract. Walking up to him, Rander kicked his lifeless body. Thump. Bullshit, I say. In the first place, the war could have been won with Jomnuk's barrier alone. Rander shouted as he glared at each and every person present in the room. The barrier could have lasted for at least 6 more months. If Jomnuk was with us, we could have figured out a way of extending it for even longer. Yet you chose to give up on him and even supported the one responsible for his loss. Spit flew from Rander's mouth as his face turned red the more he spoke. Everyone could feel the deep-rooted anger he had within him from just his voice alone. You call me a traitor? What bullshit. The only traitors here are those who gave up on Jomnuk and chose to follow this human who has made nothing but mistakes. No one disrupted him as he spoke. A deafening silence enveloped the hall. Everyone quietly listened to everything he said. Some of the dwarven elders lowered their heads in shame as they heard Rander's words. They knew just how close he was with Jomnuk. They understood where he came from. They felt a little bit of sympathy for him. But whether they agreed with him or not, that was a different argument. Everyone knew that Rander was merely deceiving himself when he said that they would have been able to win the war with Jomnuk. It was far from the truth. Eventually, the sound of Rander panting heavily resounded across the hall as he poured all of his resentment on the others. After a while, taking a deep breath, Rander calmed down and looked at everyone present in the hall. I don't care about what you guys thinking about me from now on. I've already said what I wanted to say. Call me a traitor for all I care. At the end of the day, to me, you're the traitors. Then, walking towards Orion and the others, he calmly halted his steps in front of them. Placing the palm of his hand on the table and leaning forward, he muttered, Have I proven myself enough? I've killed Gervis already. You better let me see Jomnuk as we've agreed. Calmly staring at Rander, who was standing opposite him, Orion pointed at the people standing behind. More specifically at the forces of Henneler. That'll be a bit difficult right now. He's locked in another room and the portal needs a few seconds to set up. Turning his head and staring at Douglas and the others, Rander faced Orion once again. How much time do you need? He didn't need to be told what he needed to do. He understood exactly what Orion wanted him to do next. Seeing that Rander had perfectly understood his intentions, Orion suddenly smiled. Not much. A portal doesn't take too long to function. We should be able to bring you to Jamnuk within a couple of minutes. In fact, it took a bit longer than that to set up a portal since they were currently trying to set up a portal that could teleport more than 10 people at the same time. But they had already been setting it up before the attackers came. Therefore, the time they needed to waste was a lot less. Orion suddenly frowned, the smile wiped away from his face. We've already wasted too much time here waiting for you to get rid of Gervis. Raising his hand and lifting one of his fingers, he solemnly said, 1 minute. All I want you to do is help me stall them for 1 minute. Can you do that? His question made it sound like he was asking for nothing difficult, but that would only be applicable under normal circumstances. Normally, a minute's time would have been nothing, but given the current circumstances where both sides had extremely powerful individuals ready to fight at any moment, a minute was an incredible amount of time. Within that short minute, anything could happen. It sounded simple, yet it was anything but simple. Okay. Rander nodded before walking behind Orion and the other elders. Taking out a large axe from his dimensional space, a powerful energy burst out from his body. I'll help you guys buy time while we wait for the portal to open. At his words, Orion suddenly burst out laughing. Haha, that's all I. Pih. Suddenly, disrupting the hall and cutting Orion mid-sentence was the sound of a subtle laugh that quietly sounded throughout the whole hall, catching the attention of everyone present. Turning their attention towards where the sound came from, everyone's eyes paused on a human standing at the end of the hall. Lifting his head and staring at everyone who was looking at him, the youth, Ren, realized his mistake and quickly shook his hands. Don't mind me. I'm just doing my thing. You guys keep doing your thing. I was just thinking of something funny. Unfortunately for Ren, despite his words, no one took away their attention from him. The very air chilled even more. Raising his hand and pointing it in Ren's direction, Orion's mouth opened and closed like a goldfish, struggling to form a sentence. Here. Yes, I'm the guy who pretended be Carl if that's what you're trying to ask me. Ren finished Orion's sentence for him. At this point there was no point in keeping it a secret and he was also wearing a skin mask, so even if they did try to look for him later, all they'd have on him would be an image of his fake face. Glaring in his direction, Orion slowly stood up. Next to him, the other Durgan elders did the same as they all glared in Ren's direction with undisguised malice. Because they had been in the room the whole time, they had not understood how the whole situation had happened. The situation that led to the current fiasco. But now they did. It was all that human's fault. Had it not been for him tricking the elders into thinking that he was one of them, none of this would have happened. The human opposite to them had disguised himself as Carl and created this whole mess. Just the mere thought caused the blood of some of the elders present to boil as their jaws clenched tightly. Even though they had managed to kill Gervis, the strongest dwarven elder in the city, they had still suffered tremendous losses. Not only did they lose several important elders, but they were also forced to retreat from the war because of what had happened. The demons were not pleased by the development at all. In fact, they were beyond enraged. Not only were they unable to conquer the city, but they also suffered tremendous losses without even being able to do anything. Their rage was understandable. As they stood up, all of the Durgan elders focused their attention on Ren. Especially Orion, who couldn't control himself and muttered out loud. Everything is because of you. If not for you, we would have never been in such a situation. A powerful energy burst forth from Orion's body as he stared daggers at Ren. Following his example, the other elders also did the same as multiple powerful auras sprang forth from their small bodies, heading towards Ren's direction. Not on my watch. Stepping in between the elders and Ren, Douglas waved his hand and the aura that shot towards Ren was neatly cut in two. A powerful gust of wind blew over Ren as his long hair became undone. Following this, everyone in the room took out their weapons and multiple oppressive auras burst forth from the body of each individual present in the room. A terrifying and chilling standoff ensued as both sides prepared to kill each other. And just as the air was starting to get incredibly tense, a ringing sound rang out. The sound once again originated from Ren's direction. He nonchalantly took out a small communication device from his dimensional space and answered it. Hello. His relaxed, even lazy voice rang inside of the hall, much to the confusion of everyone present. Glancing at the others, he lowered his head in apology, his voice never dimming. I see, so you're also done. I'm a bit busy at the moment, but I'll tell the others about your accomplishments. The call was quick. It only lasted a few seconds, but the last words he said caught the interest of some of the people present. They weren't stupid. Something was up. Putting the communication device back in his dimensional space, Ren slowly turned his head to face Orion and the others. Scratching the back of his head, he opened his mouth and rhetorically asked, So, you know the dampening system that caused you a lot of problems before? Without waiting for him to answer, turning his head slightly, Ren's eyes paused on Rander. Well, I've set it back up, so you don't have to worry about leaving this place. What do you The moment his words faded, the portal being set up in the distance disrupted. It wasn't long before everyone realized that the connection with the portal was fading away as the portal continued to morph in a vivid, pulsating manner. This continued for the next few seconds. It slowly dawned on everyone present that Ren's words were no joke. The dampening system was back up. Staring at the portal, trembling all over, Orion snapped his head towards Douglas and Ren's direction. You spurt. But before he could even finish his sentence, Orion suddenly felt a stinging sensation in his back. The pain was only slight, but it soon covered his entire body. Before he knew it, Orion's body started to slowly stiffen and paralyze. Turning his head, his pupils dilated as he saw Rander standing behind him with a familiar dagger in his hand. Why? With a cold smile on his face, Rander muttered, Unlike that one, I'm using a different kind of poison. A poison that actually kills the ones who come into contact with it. Following his words, Gervis, who everyone thought was dead, slowly stood up. Glaring at Rander for a split second before turning his attention back to Orion, Gervis's lips parted, a voice that came back from the dead echoing in the hall. Even though I have no idea about what happened, it looks like this is our win. Chapter 363. Everything coming together. 1 month ago, Douglas's residence. No, I would like it if her presence still remains a secret. Oh. Why is that? Douglas curiously asked. Leaning back on my chair, I tapped on the wooden armrest. Why? Briefly glancing at Angelica from the corner of my eyes, I calmly opened my mouth. Because we can use her presence to our advantage. To our advantage? Both Douglas and Waylon frowned at my words. Douglas's calm gaze directed itself back towards the defiant Angelica. How can she be of help? He asked. Plaque. Tapping onto my bracelet and taking out a wooden mask from the dimensional space, I placed it on the table for everyone to see. What's this? Waylon questioned. Douglas, who was beside him, leaned forward to get a better look at it. I extended my hand towards the mask. Rather than me telling you, how about you guys have a look yourself? Raising his eyes, Douglas didn't say much and grabbed the mask. The moment his hands touched its surface, Douglas's calm face trembled slightly. Interesting, he muttered, his eyes rippling slightly. It was clear that the mask had surprised him. Waylon obviously did not miss this and took the mask from Douglas's hands. Holy shit. Unlike Douglas, his words were a lot cruder, but it was also clear that he was as surprised as him when he saw the effects of the mask. This is way better than the skin masks we use. Putting the mask on his face, the moment it touched his face, his appearance slowly started to morph before changing to that of one of the guards I met back in the monolith. To be precise, it was the guard I had killed during my escape from the infirmary. This feels weird, Waylon muttered as he touched his face. Touching his nose and pinching it slightly, Waylon's hand traced his jaw. I don't feel like I'm wearing the mask at all, but I can tell that this is not my face. This is amazing. I could feel hints of jealousy in his voice as he spoke those words. To be honest, I couldn't really blame him. I too would have been jealous if someone else showed me the mask. It was just that good. Anyway, what did you want to tell us by showing this mask? Waylon said as he removed the mask from his face and placed it on the table. Since you've showed it to us, it must mean that you've got a plan. Douglas calmly added from the side, his eyes never leaving the mask on the table. Staring at him from my seat, I could see that Douglas's eyes contained no trace of desire as he looked at the mask. They did contain hints of curiosity within but nothing else. Taking my eyes away from Douglas, I nodded in affirmation. I do. Care to share? Waylon asked, leaning back on his chair. It's just a rough plan for now. What if I infiltrate Inferno? A chilly silence shrouded the room as both Douglas and Waylon looked at me with open eyes. Sitting up straight, the first one to speak was Waylon. Are you crazy? Are you trying to get yourself killed? Raising my hand, I pointed at Waylon in a shaking manner. In response to your questions, yes and no respectively. Elaborate. Think about it. The way that we're going, the result of the war will remain uncertain. In fact, it'll probably last for at least a couple more years. Turning my head to face Douglas, I posed a question. Don't you want to go back to the academy instead of being here? Before he could answer, turning my head towards Waylon, I asked him something else. Don't you want to meet Emma? Crossing my legs and staring at both Waylon and Douglas, who had complicated looks on their faces, I spoke up, striking while the iron was hot. I know what I'm proposing is absurd and what I have in my head is just a rough plan, but I do believe we have the necessary means to accomplish this. Finished speaking, I stared at both Waylon and Douglas, waiting for them to speak. After a while, the one who first broke the silence was Douglas. He leaned forward slightly and carefully asked, "How confident are you in accomplishing this task?" It depends. It's not that I'm not confident. It's just that we'll first need Jomnuk to agree with it. Without him, a major part of the plan wouldn't work, and as I've said before, Angelica could be of big help to me. Unblinkingly staring at me from his seat, Douglas didn't say anything for the next minute. Waylon, who was sitting beside him, also kept silent as they both contemplated on the matter at hand. After a while, standing up, Douglas took out a communication device from his dimensional space and tried to get in contact with Jomnuk. I'll try arranging a meeting with him. If you can manage to convince him, then we can proceed with what you've planned. That's all I'm asking for, I gratefully said to Douglas as he smiled back in kind. Since you're one of my students, it's my duty as headmaster to give you a helping hand. Pausing, Douglas recalled a sudden detail before his lips parted and a small smile appeared on his face. Even if you're no longer attending the academy. As soon as he finished saying those words, walking out of the room, Douglas quickly got in contact with Jomnuk. How interesting, Jomnuk muttered as he scanned the mask of Dolos in his hands. Putting the mask down, he looked towards Douglas sitting next to me. After arranging a meeting with him, we quickly headed to where he was. For obvious reasons, I disguised myself as someone else since Ren could not meet Jomnuk just yet. So, you want to use this mask to pretend to be me and infiltrate the headquarters of Inferno? In short, yes, Douglas replied. After discussing it for a while, we think that this is the best way to deal significant damage to Inferno as well as stop the war, he added. Leaning back on his chair and crossing his legs, Jomnuk stroked his beard. Interesting. He softly muttered, not only do you want to pretend to be me, but you also want me to give you the method of disabling the system beacons? Just 2 beacons, Douglas corrected from the side. That's still a pretty huge thing you're asking of me. You must know that each time a beacon is disabled, the barrier protecting the city weakens as a result. We know, but this is the best way to make them believe that you were truly kidnapped, Waylon said as he joined in on the conversation. I don't disagree, but Jomnuk's brows furrowed. This is not enough to ensure the plan goes smoothly. There are too many loose factors at the moment. I also agree with this, and that's why we came to talk to you. If we have an elder supporting us, we can increase our chances even further. I'm sure you know someone you would trust your back to, don't you? Douglas asked, his eyes looking straight at Jomnuk, who knit his brows in thought. Although I don't know how he'll react, we can give it a try. Sighing, Jomnuk took out a small box from his dimensional space and put it in the middle of the table. Pressing the top of the box, it lit up and a holographic image soon materialized before everyone. Jomnuk? Who are you with? A rough voice sounded from the other side of the hologram before the image of a dwarf appeared before everyone. Rander. Jomnuk greeted him with a smile on his face. Facing Jomnuk, Rander's brows furrowed. You're using an encrypted line. Do you have something important to say? Yes, listen here. Nodding, Jomnuk slowly started recounting the things Douglas had told him during the meeting. He started from how we were planning on swapping me with him and subsequently infiltrating Inferno. Of course, he didn't leave out the fact that we requested to have him hand over the methods of deactivating 2 beacons in order to gain the Duergar's trust. And that's it. What do you think? I've thought about it and it does seem like a good method, but it lacks support. That's why I called you my friend. You're someone I trust with my life. Finished speaking, heavy silence descended over the room as Rander's brows furrowed tightly. This is quite the plan, he muttered, his tone sounding a bit uncertain. Lifting his head up, he calmly looked at everyone present in the room before his eyes paused on Douglas. If I say yes, what do you want me to do? I can support you, but what will my role be? Don't get the wrong idea, human. I'm only asking to get a better idea. I'm not agreeing to anything just yet. We want you to betray the dwarves. I cut in before Douglas could even start speaking. The moment my words faded, both Jomnuk and Rander snapped their heads in my direction, shock displayed on their faces. Waylon and Douglas shook their heads slightly. Before letting the others misunderstand, I continued speaking. It's simple really. Since you're good friends with Jomnuk, what would you do if he suddenly gets kidnapped? I'd do everything in my power to get him back, Rander replied in a matter-of-fact tone. I nodded in response. Exactly. And we can exploit this. You mean? Both Jomnuk and Rander raised their brows at my words as they slowly started to understand where I was getting at. Yes, there's a high chance that once Jomnuk gets kidnapped, Waylon will go under persecution. In the most likely case, he will not suffer any major setbacks since he is only partly to blame for Jomnuk's kidnapping. And so you want me to pretend to be extremely enraged and eventually propose a deal with Inferno to trade Jomnuk in exchange for betraying the dwarves. Rander completed the sentence for me, shaking his head in interest. I gave a slight nod. Exactly it. You can even propose a mana contract with them, telling them that if they hand over Jomnuk, you will betray the dwarves. But the contract will not work since you're the Jomnuk that they have kidnapped. Yeah, I see. That works. Rander repeatedly nodded as he mused over the plan. After a while, staring at Jomnuk, he slowly said, the plan is doable. I'm not against it. Everyone's eyes lit up the moment he said those words. So you're willing to help? Waylon asked. Turning to face Waylon, Rander nodded in reassurance. Why not? The plan is still a bit crude, but once we take care of the minor problems, it can deal a massive blow to Inferno and end the war. Pausing, Rander's face suddenly turned serious. We have to keep this meeting amongst ourselves and never let anyone else apart from the 5 of us know about the plan. Not even Gervis or the others must know. The fewer people know about this, the higher the chance of this plan working will be. I agree, I said, nodding my head. Like the idiom said, in order to deceive your enemy, deceive your allies first. You were careless. Since you never kidnapped Jomnuk, the contract was never active. All it took was one small detail to completely have you within my grasp. Rander uttered as he brought his face close to Orion. Ugh. Staring at Rander with wide-open eyes, Orion had trouble formulating any words as the poison in his body slowly started corroding his organs. Even though he was higher ranked than Rander by 1 subrank, Orion was unable to defend himself from the sudden sneak attack that had been mixed with an extremely potent poison. Had he not been as strong as he was now, he would have probably died already. But even the strongest could not escape their fate, as Orion slowly slumped on the ground, to the shock of everyone present in the room. As he fell on the floor, Orion's face was filled with horror and indignation. 364 The end of the war. With a loud thud, Orion's body fell face first on the ground. As his body fell onto the ground, everything froze and the atmosphere in the hall chilled completely. Apart from Waylon and Douglas, everyone had confused and astonished looks on their faces. Suddenly, out of nowhere, Rander, who everyone thought was a traitor, turned out to never have been a traitor but was actually manipulating the whole scene from behind. Not everyone was clear about what had happened, but they all knew that at this moment, Orion had been taken out by Rander. I guess my job's done. I'm tired. Staring at the scene from afar, my eyes grew heavy. For the past week or so I have had sleepless nights, trying my best to infiltrate this place and making sure everything went according to plan. It was hard. It was really hard. In an unfamiliar place surrounded by enemies, this place reminded me of my time back at the Monolith. Just the mere thought about the past made it hard for me to get a good night's sleep as the nightmares would haunt me in my sleep. I could only cope with the nightmares by working even more, trying my best to make sure that my plan had no flaws. A A soft yawn involuntarily escaped from my lips. Blinking a couple of more times, turning around, I headed for the door and exited the hall. Soon enough a massive battle would ensue, and given my current state and strength, I would be nothing but a burden. The best course of action for my sake was to just leave. Upon exiting the hall and walking quite far from it, entering a secluded room and closing the door behind me, I took out my communication device and sent a message to Waylon and the others. "Once you're done, come and wake me up." The message was short and concise with the coordinates of my location attached to it. BZZ. Ah, right, the dampening system is back on. It was then that I realized that the dampening system was back on and I could no longer send a message. Oh well. Shrugging my shoulders and leaning back on the wall, I slid down and finally relaxed. It's finally over. At least my part was over. Everything else would be left to Douglas and the others. With the teleportation devices down and their leader currently under the effects of a strong poison, everything was set for our victory. Finally, after planning everything for over a month, the plans came to fruition and the war was now as good as over. Although the fight might be a difficult one, I had done everything within my power to give the dwarves a large advantage. If they couldn't even win after all I've done for them, they might as well just die. I'm tired. I muttered out loud, my eyes slowly closing. I don't know how I was able to last this long with everything that was going on, but I should be able to get some rest now, right? I can at least have this much? I inwardly to myself as my eyes slowly closed and my vision slowly turned dark. Leave no one alive. Gervis's cold voice rang throughout the hall as a powerful energy blast shot towards from his large staff, towards the Durgars in the distance. I repeat, make sure you kill everyone in the hall. Spare no one. He of course reminded everyone to kill all the Durgars in the hall. Since their goal was to stop the war and deal significant damage to the demons outside, sparing anyone in the hall was not an option. They had to all die. Boom. A torrential energy blast shot out from both sides as the mana in the air froze and the space distorted. The terrifying fluctuations that came from the attacks of each side would have left anyone weaker than S rank paralyzed in fear, unable to move. 1345. Despite of the fact that the walls of the room were made out of limestone, as both sides attacked each other, the walls slowly started to crumble apart. It was clear to see that the power of the individuals present was too much for the walls to hold. Rumble. The whole room shook and more energy blasts and attacks shot from the opposite directions as the representatives from each side fought with their own lives in the line. There were no fanciful attacks, but each and every attack that came from the individuals present in the room could shake the whole city outside. If not for the special room they were in, everything would have long crumbled apart within seconds that the fight had started. Bang. Blasting away one of the Durgan elders away with his long staff, Gervis looked in Rander's direction. At the moment he had joined back their side and was fighting against another Durgan elder who was glaring holes at him. Swinging his axe downwards and blocking an attack coming the elder, sensing something, Rander turned his head and his eyes soon met with Gervis's. Once their eyes met, Gervis gave him an all-known look and mouthed, "We'll be having a long talk later." Some may not know this, but when Rander stabbed him in the back, Gervis had genuinely thought that he had betrayed him. He was stronger than Rander, but Rander was not an elder for nothing. Despite his strength, he was unable to react before he had already stabbed him in the back. Once he got stabbed in the back, he felt his own body paralyze, and for a brief moment of time he actually thought he was going to die. But that sensation didn't last for long, as before he knew it, he had gained his consciousness back and was presented with a familiar scene. It was a scene where Rander stabbed someone in the back, but this time the one at the end of the dagger was not him but Orion. It didn't take long for Gervis to understand what had happened, as he soon got a clear picture of what had happened. In order to deceive the enemies, he decided to deceive them as well. It was a great plan, but Gervis was not too pleased with it. Was he that untrustworthy? "We will definitely talk about this matter later," Gervis said once more as he turned distance. Staring at Gervis in the distance, Rander's face became bitter. "I did it in order to ensure the highest chance of success, and it worked, and I didn't even stab him that hard." He inwardly muttered to himself as he lamented over his bleak future. He did this for the benefit of the dwarves, yet he was going to get an earful for what he had done later. He really was not looking forward to that. Well, whatever, a small price to pay for victory. Shrugging his shoulders, Rander once again raised his axe in the air. Preparing his attack, the mana in the air gathered towards the head of his axe, and a bright glow enshrouded the whole area around him. Raising his hands, he slashed down. Bang! Gervais's body jerked as he slashed down while the mana converged towards him, transforming into a white stream that headed with a frightening power towards the elder in the distance. As he was currently fighting against an orc, he was unable to react in time by the time the attack reached him, and it directly hit him in the body. Clank! But the elder was not an elder for nothing. The moment he knew that he could not dodge the attack, rather than dodging the attack, he did nothing, and a loud metallic sound rang out throughout the hall. The metallic ring lasted for a brief moment before disappearing as the Durgan elder remained standing. Revealed underneath his torn clothes was a buff metallic armor. A subtle glow enveloped the armor as the elder turned his attention towards Rander. He had an almost smug look on his face as he looked at Rander opposite to him, but contrary to his expectations, Rander did not care one bit for him as he slowly turned around and left, much to the surprise of the elder. Before the elder could react, a large hand came from above, grabbing him by the head and smashing it towards the ground. Boom! With a large sound, the head of the elder smashed against the ground with a bang. Fine miniature cracks formed around the area where his head smashed. The one responsible for the attack was the orc from before. Rander's goal was never to defeat the elder. He was only trying to distract him to buy 1346. An opportunity for the orc. He knew that his attack wouldn't have worked since the elder had an armor. Being an elder, Rander obviously knew who the Durgan elders were and how they fought. So he knew from the very beginning that he wore an armor. Usually, armors were only worn by tanking-type individuals. Typically not many wore it since it consumed quite a lot of mana and weighted quite a lot. An example would be Orion and Gervais. As they were both long-range type fighters, in order to maximize their movements, they refrained themselves from wearing an armor. Still, even if they wore an armor, Rander wouldn't have had a problem taking them down since he mainly relied on the poison rather than the attack to deal damage to them. As long as he just gave them a scratch, they would have found themselves in the same situation. Let's get this over with. Planting the heel of his foot on the ground, Rander shot towards a nearby Duergar and once again attacked. Bang bang. Tremendous energy blasts shook the entire hall as the terrifying battle continued. Blood spilled from both sides as the Duergars fought with their life on the line. Some tried to run but were soon stopped by even more reinforcements coming. In the end, by the time the third hour passed, all of the Duergars in the hall were dead. None remained standing. Panting heavily and supporting his body with his staff, Gervais looked at the hall which used to be the Elder Council of Inferno. It was a scene of carnage. The hall was now dyed red with blood as pieces of flesh and limbs scattered all over the hard ground. Propping his body up with the aid of his stuff, Gervais turned to face his right where another dwarf stood. It was Alga. With her hair disheveled and panting heavily, she too looked extremely tired but her eyes were bright. "We did it, we finally won," she muttered in a relieved and joyful tone. The raw emotions contained within her voice were clear for anyone around her to feel. "We did," Gervais added by the side, walking up to her. Staring at the scene before him, a heavy load was lifted away from his shoulders. They had finally defeated Inferno. But Gervais's joy didn't last for long as his face soon became serious. "What are our losses?" he asked, with his brows furrowed, intently staring at the surroundings before him. Turning her head, Alga's previous joyful expression turned into a bitter one as she lowered her head and said, "We've lost a total of 6 people out of the 14 that came with us. Of the 6, 4 of them are from our side." "Shit," Gervais cursed out. It had to be noted that all those that died were elders who stood at the peak of Henler, each ranging from S rank to SS. Every one of their death was a big blow to their power. Fortunately, with Inferno now gone, they could grow and recuperate their losses easily, but it still pained Gervais, who had spent years with each and everyone present. Lifting his head up, with his bushy eyebrows locked into a frown and staring at one of the panels that had somehow managed to survive the terrifying battle that had ensued in the hall, displaying the situation outside, Gervais turned his head and looked at the others people present in the hall. "We'll hold a tribute for all our fallen comrades later. For now, let's get rid of the remaining forces outside. It's not over till it's really over." His powerful voice reverberated throughout the whole hall as everyone lifted their head and stared in his direction. It was only then that they realized that a battle was still going on outside. Carrying his tired body towards the exit of the hall, Gervas stumbled a couple of times, but using his last bits of energy he continued to move forward. As a leader he had to set an example. His weak and tired figure stood as an example to the people present as soon, following him from behind, were the survivors of the terrifying battle. As they carried their bodies outside, although tired and injured, everyone knew that at this moment the war was finally over. They had finally won. Chapter 365. The End of the War, 2. Here. Waking me from my slumber was a low buzzing sound coming from my right side. It was quite subtle, reminiscent of a bee's buzz. Needless to say, it was fairly annoying. Opening my eyes slightly and lowering my head towards the direction of where the buzzing sound was coming from, my sight soon paused on the communication device tightly held in my right hand. Here. The buzzing sound continued, and as my mind cleared up, I could feel my hand vibrate slightly. How long have I been sleeping for? My thoughts felt groggy as I propped my body up with the aid of the wall. Since the communication device is working, they should already be done by now. Lowering my head and turning the communication device on, I spoke in a thick, hoarse voice. Hello? You guys done already? Rain. The moment I answered the communication device, Waylon's voice sounded from the speaker, cutting me off. His voice was quite loud and sounded a bit panicked. Instantly, my head sobered up and my brows furrowed tightly. My body tensed slightly. What happened while I was gone? Did something go wrong? Did the enemies perhaps have a secret weapon that we were not aware of? Many possibilities rushed through my head as my heart sank. Thinking of all the possible things that may have gone wrong while I was asleep, my previous relaxed attitude completely vanished as I prepared for the worst. What are you talking about? What do you mean? Did something go wrong or not? But it looked like I was overthinking too much as Waylon's words allayed my fears. No, everything is fine. I'm only calling because we were worried that something happened to you. You just left out of nowhere without even telling us what you were going. Right, the dampening system was back on and I couldn't quite tell them that I was taking a nap. Smiling wryly, I scratched the back of my head. Sorry about that. I was taking a nap. Since I couldn't participate in the fight, I figured that I may as well just go to a random room and sleep. I was gonna be a burden anyway. Silence. Once my words faded, I was met with total silence. Even though he wasn't present at the moment, I could vividly imagine Waylon opening and closing his mouth, speechless, trying to find the right words to say. It might have looked amusing to an onlooker, but I was feeling a bit guilty. Just a little. The silence continued for a brief moment before Waylon repeated. A nap? Did you just say that you were taking a nap? His voice was filled with incredulity, as though he couldn't quite comprehend what I just said. Being the good guy that I was, I nodded to confirm my previous words, even though he couldn't see it. Yes, that's exactly what I said. I took a nap. Struggling to find the right words to say, Waylon fumbled before eventually giving up, letting out a long, exhausted sigh. What should I do with you? If not for the fact that I don't have the slightest idea of where you are, I'd have already strangled you to death. That's a bit harsh, no? I was just taking a small nap. I don't think that warrants getting strangled over. You know what? I give up. Where are you? Send us your coordinates, we'll send someone to pick you up. Sure, give me a second. Lowering my head and checking the coordinates of the room with the aid of a small device, I quickly sent Waylon the location of the place. Once I sent the message, lowering my hand to stare at the communication device, I asked, Did you get it? Give me a moment. Yes, I've got it. Good. Need something else from me? Leaning against the side of the wall, I once again slid down and propped my hand over my knee. We don't need anything else, just stay out of trouble. A brief pause ensued. After a couple of seconds, in a low whisper, Waylon said, And thank you for your hard work. Had it not been for your help, the war would have never been over. No problem. Not like I did everything myself anyway. I tiredly said, closing my eyes. After checking the time, I realized that I had only slept for a total of 3 hours. This was clearly not enough as my mind was still quite groggy. I'll hang up now. Soon enough, someone should come to pick you up. Once they knock on the door, open it, okay? Sure. I replied, my eyes stinging slightly from the lack of sleep. I'll see you soon. Great job. You too. Those were the last words I said before turning off the communication device, and my eyelids slowly came to a close. After the events of Inferno, The raging war that took place on the outer walls of Henneler came to a halt as the demons stopped their assault and retreated. Although not many knew what had happened, once Gervis, alongside the others, returned and announced the end of the war, everyone in the city rejoiced as the citizens and warriors alike basked in a joyous atmosphere. One point of concern was the fact that the demons had still not fully retreated, but they had stopped attacking and even showed signs of giving up did not go unnoticed by the dwarves, who rejoiced boisterously. The bars and taverns were filled with dwarves, orcs, and even elves as they happily chatted amongst each other. It was clear that the war, although brought great suffering, had also strengthened the bonds of those who participated in it. They all held each other in high regard. Sitting inside of a particular tavern in Henneler on a round table were 6 hooded figures in black. So you're saying that on your way to the dampening system you encountered a Durgan lady and she's still alive? One of the hooded figures spoke up in shock, his body trembling slightly. What have you done with her? Have you told the others about her? Or do only you guys know? The hooded figure asked, his tone containing a great depth of solemnity. We weren't the only ones present back then, since we had another dwarf escort us to the location you sent us. That's also where we met her. But her condition seemed quite critical. She looked to be on the verge of death when we met her. What was the Duergar's rank? The hooded figure asked. His serious tone made the atmosphere on the table turn somber. If I don't recall wrongly, she was S-ranked. Her injuries were quite serious. I see. The hooded figure muttered with a complex frown on his face. He lifted his face slightly, revealing the features of a young man with pale blue eyes resembling the ocean. It was Ren. He was currently seated with his members of Kaisa, Ava, Hein, Leopold, Small Snake and Ryan. The Duergar they were talking about was probably Durara, the one who killed Ultruk. Recalling that piece of information, Ren's face paled slightly, but he was able to recompose himself quite quickly. Turning to glance at the others on the table, Ren carefully worded his reply, "She's extremely dangerous. You must be extremely careful around her. In fact, have you even restrained her mana yet? Don't worry, we're not that stupid." But from the looks of things, his worries were unnecessary as Leopold and the others gave him confirmation that they had indeed sealed her up. "Where is she?" Ren asked. "She's currently locked up, thanks to the dwarves," Hein responded, taking a small sip of the ale in front of him. "She's locked up?" Ren's brow raised a little before he leaned back on his chair. Stroking his chin, Ren had a thoughtful look on his face. Curious as to what he was thinking, Small Snake opened his mouth, deciding to ask directly. He had an ominous premonition. "What are you thinking so hard about? You can't be." "Can't be what?" Ren asked, raising his head, a sly smile appearing on his lips. All too familiar with the smile, Small Snake raised his hands and shook them in panic. "No, I'm against it. Whatever you're planning, I'm totally against it." "What's wrong, Small Snake?" Ren asked, his smile only growing. "What's up with you? What are you talking about?" The others, or to be more precise, Leopold and Hein, grew confused at Small Snake's sudden outburst. Raising his hand and pointing it in the direction of Ren's face, Small Snake raised his voice. "You see that smirk over there? Well, I've seen it plenty of times. Whenever he smiles like that, you should know that nothing good will come. Trust me, I've experienced it too many times for you to imagine." Listening to Small Snake's words, Ren innocently tilted his head. "What are you talking about, Small Snake?" Right as he said those words, the corners of his mouth moved up slightly. This did not go unnoticed by Small Snake. He slapped the table and once again pointed his finger in Ren's direction. "You see it? That smirk over there. That's the smirk of a devil. The devil, I say." Tisk. Clicking his tongue, Ren turned his head and muttered quietly, "Relax, Small Snake. I'm not planning on doing anything you're thinking about just yet." "Yet? I don't like that yet. Are you telling me that you're planning something later?" Small Snake muttered in panic, his complexion paling. Just recalling the events in the past made Small Snake's body tremble. Frowning slightly, Ren briefly glanced in Small Snake's direction and didn't answer. "As I was saying, I won't have time to do anything crazy. Oh dear God, save me." Small Snake clasped his hands together and looked up towards the ceiling, praying in earnest. "What have I done to deserve this?" Taking a glimpse at Small Snake from the corner of his eyes, Ren paused and secretly shook his head. "Am I really that bad? He really couldn't understand where Small Snake was coming from. Although he did do some crazy stuff, it worked out most of the time. He was merely overreacting in his opinion. Anyways, as I was saying, we're going to be attending the morning ceremony tomorrow. And in 2 weeks' time, once they are all done with the mourning, the elders have invited us along Waylon and the others to commemorate our achievements. Leaning forward slightly and pinching his fingers, Rin looked at everyone in the eyes and softly said, "You know what I mean, right?" Everyone's brows twitched as they looked at Rin. They all understood what he implied. They had to admit they were also tempted by the upcoming rewards. But to be so blunt about it, only Rin could do it. While the others looked at him in disgust, Rin took a sip of his ale. Ugh. But the moment his lips touched the ale, his face cramped up. Ugh, it's so bitter. What do you expect? Small Snake said, taking a big swig of the ale in his hands. An odd look appeared on his face as he looked at Rin opposite of him. It had been an hour since Rin entered the tavern and he barely drank the ale. He kept trying, but the result was always the same. His face cramping up and then him muttering about how bitter his drink was. Annoyed by the stares coming from the others, Rin stood up and lightly glared at them. Well, whatever. You guys do yourselves. I'm done drinking. I'm going to rest up a little more. Although a couple of days had passed since the war had ended, Rin was still tired. In fact, now that he thought about it, he did not even have a single moment of rest after escaping the monolith, as he was repeatedly dragged into complicated situations. Now that the situation in the city had calmed down, Rin was planning on using this time productively. And that was by resting as much as he could. He had earned himself a little bit of rest.